Hi, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to today's NEDA's Connections. My name is Chelsea Cronengold, and I am NEDA's Communications Manager. And today I am joined with Amy Pershing, and we're going to be talking about trauma and eating disorders during the COVID-19 pandemic. So Amy is the founder of BodyWise Binge Eating Disorder Recovery Program and the clinical director of the Center of Eating Disorders in Ann Arbor, Michigan. Amy is the author of the book Binge Eating Disorder, The Journey to Recovery and Beyond, and the creator of HungerWise, online programs for ending chronic dieting and weight cycling. Hi, Amy. Thank you so much for being here today.
Hi, thank you. I'm delighted to join you.
And this is such an important topic, so I'm ready to dive right into it. So during this COVID-19 pandemic, we're all experiencing this collective trauma right now. But why is this experience even more difficult for people that have trauma histories, including eating disorders?
There are actually a lot of reasons that there are commonalities between what's happening right now in this pandemic and often how people experienced trauma, especially growing up. So there are a lot of parallels that are important to think about. One is people have very little control right now about what happens, which is the same as it was growing up. Again, particularly if the trauma happened as a child. We have no sense of really a safe place to go or what makes for safety, right? So it's hard to feel safe, right? We don't really have a good source of information. We don't really know what's true and what's not true. We feel powerless and unable to change things. We might feel like we know a truth, but it's not being recognized or appreciated. There are a lot of reasons that what's happening right now can feel very much for people like some of the experiences that were traumatizing for them, especially those with complex trauma. That is trauma that they experienced growing up. And the other thing I think we can think about is the potential threat. Right now, we might get really sick. We might even die. People that we love and care about might even die. That is as scary as it would be to be a child in a system that's not safe. So there are a lot of triggers right now that people can be experiencing.
And you're right. The reality of this is, it's real and it's scary. And so what are some of the signs that we're feeling the effects of this current time and feeling the effects of trauma during this current time?
Yeah, so there actually are a number of things that we can just, try to pay attention to and see if we're noticing them. One is certainly a desire to engage in eating disorder behaviors, right? When we get really scared, of course, one of the things that can be true when we get activated around trauma is that we tend to go to the coping mechanisms that we know the best. And eating disorders, especially if they developed early in life, around trauma, can be very entrenched behaviors as ways to try to feel safe. So that's one. Another one can be all the body shame narratives that people have can be even worse. So those things can be really triggered because when we get scared, that's one of the things in eating disorders that really gets triggered. So it's important to watch for that. Are those narratives louder even than they usually are? We can watch for that fight, flight, freeze, fawn activation, right? To pay attention as trauma survivors. And that might show up as perfectionism, being really strong, like trying to control something in order to feel safe. It can show up as big bursts of emotion, anger or sadness or fear or grief. It can show up as wanting to isolate. And not wanting to connect with others because they feel scary or threatening or dangerous, or wanting to shut down or dissociate. That is wanting sometimes maybe to want to binge, or to go to a binge purge cycle to disconnect. Again, having emotions that are bigger than the situation warrants, right? So that is we're reacting not only to what's scary right now, but all the things in our history that may be like this scary thing. So we might have really big reactions to the things around us. Another thing to notice is if you're feeling especially young or vulnerable. We call that sometimes hijacked by a young energy. And basically what that means is in our brain and in our experience, we're there then instead of here now. And so we're back in the time when we felt the most powerless and the most afraid. And then finally, other responses in the body. really most of our experiences of trauma are in the body. That's where we notice them the most. So muscle tightening, shortness of breath, feeling overwhelming fatigue, having trouble recognizing our hunger and fullness cues certainly can be a problem too.
Yeah, and I want to go into some strategies that can help people. But before we do that, I'm actually wondering if we could take a step back and if you can explain what trauma is, because I know a lot of people are probably thinking, you know, it has to have to do with sexual assault or verbal, emotional assault, things like that. But there's a lot of other smaller scale things that are trauma, and they're
Absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah. So basically, trauma is any kind of experience that threatens our sense of safety or our sense of body or personal integrity with no viable means for escape. Right? So we can live through things that are very difficult. But if we have the support that we need and a sense of safety, a sense of the event having an end point, right, where it was really scary and things were really difficult and we got through it and we came back to safety, we don't end up traumatized. So what's true is difficult events aren't necessarily traumatic. It depends on how we survive through them. So traumatic experiences can be the things that we tend to think of when we think of trauma. So significant losses, obviously abuse of all different kinds, physical, sexual, emotional abuse, but it also can be more subtle. It can be things like neglect or things like just not getting enough attention or getting our needs met often enough. Again, we don't need anything perfect in childhood. We just need good enough, right? But if we're not getting that met, or if we lose one of our caregivers, if we lose a parent, for example, or if we lose somebody who's really important to us and there isn't something there to keep us safe afterwards so we can process through that. So all of those things are traumatizing. And what that means is that basically our coping mechanisms become the most important thing. So instead of thriving, we're surviving. And as a result of that, we make a lot of adaptations to survive those traumatizing situations. And as we grow up, the ways that we use the coping mechanisms that we develop become damaging when we get older. And so that's a piece of sometimes what eating disorders are about for people. Not always, but sometimes.
And so what can we do to help ourselves during this time or during eating disorder recovery, which a lot of people are coexisting with that right now, you know, if you do have a history of trauma?
Yeah. So the good news is there actually are a lot of different things that we can do. So that's the good news. And that's one of the things that makes now different from then. Again, particularly in the cases of childhood trauma, what children can do to keep themselves safe is well, they can't keep themselves safe, but what they can do to try to feel safer is very limited. So the good news is, as adults, we've got access to more kinds of resources. Different people have access to different amounts of resources and strategies, but we have more strategies than we did as a child. So there are a number of things that can be helpful. One of the things I think that before we even think about those strategies that I think is especially good to bear in mind is that right now is a really scary time. You know, I sometimes talk about with my clients about old bears. You know, that is the things that felt really scary, but that aren't actually dangerous right now. They were dangerous back in the day, and we may still react in the world as though that danger still exists, even though it doesn't. But what's true is right now, there are bears.
Mm-hmm.
There are real dangers. There are things that are really scary right now and potentially really dangerous to our health and well-being. So I think we need to honor that when we feel afraid, that's not just about trauma activation, although that may be another layer. So we want to keep in mind that, of course, we're scared right now, that it's reasonable to feel fear. I think we tend to pathologize fear, right? And sort of say somehow we're not supposed to feel afraid. I think what's true is we need to learn to tolerate the experience of fear. Fear ebbs and flows like any feeling. It won't hurt you. We need to be able to tolerate it. So I just want to say that kind of as a caveat.
I agree with that. That's really important.
Yeah, to some of the strategies. So I think one thing that can help sometimes when we feel overwhelmed is to remember that really big picture, what we need to do is just the next right thing, right? We're not going to be able to figure this out or solve this. We don't know yet a whole lot of how this is going to turn out. We don't know. So we're living with uncertainty, which is especially tough for trauma survivors because uncertainty didn't just mean, gee, we don't know. It meant the potential for danger. And so uncertainty can feel intrinsically scary. So part of our job is to soothe those scared parts and live with some uncertainty. One thing that can help that, again, is to just, what is the next right thing? If I get scared, what's the next thing that will help me? So that's important, is to keep our sights close by so that we're not trying to solve everything. That's one piece. Another one is to honor that it's okay to struggle. It's okay to have a lot of feelings. It's okay to have feelings that shift and change a lot, that are different from day to day. I know with this for me, some days I wake up and I'm like, okay, I got this. It'll be all right. And then the next day I might wake up and think, oh my gosh, I don't know what to do. And those are both true reactions. So that's part of it, is just making some space for having a lot of feelings about what's going on. Being triggered, being activated is not being crazy. It's not a relapse. It's not going to harm you if you're feeling that trauma activation. But have around you, have nearby the resources that help you to work on breathing, or to work on, what are the things that really help ground you back here in the moment? Who are the people that you can touch base with who really help to ground you? Do you have access to your support system, to online, to your therapist, or to other people who get what you're going through? Because that community piece is really important. If we think about as a child, particularly again with childhood trauma, we didn't have a whole lot of supports available that we could choose. Now we do. So that piece is really important. None of us is in this alone. And again, that's very different than history. Try to remember the whole truth when we get back into that centered place. I think it can really help if we remember that there are bad things, there are uncertainties. But what's also true is that there are good things. There are things for which we can be grateful. We do have power in different ways. So we want to reconnect to things that make us feel powerful, that connect us to the big picture of what's important.
Well, do you have any additional closing thoughts, anything that I didn't ask in the question you want to make sure you touch upon? I think this has been such an incredible and helpful conversation. I imagine a lot of people are experiencing these things, experiencing trauma without knowing it's trauma. They're, feeling, like you said, like feeling kind of crazy. 1 minute they're happy, 1 minute they're crying, and like that's natural, that's fine. Giving yourself space for that self-compassion. Anything else you want to ask on or say on an ending note?
Yeah, one thing I would say is, what is something that you can do that connects you to the best in you, that connects you really to what's meaningful to you, what's most important, what is your resilient heart? How do you connect to that resilient heart? That's bigger than this pandemic. It's bigger than this moment. It will be there for you always. What connects you to that? Is it music? Is it art? Is it nature? What connects you back to your core? And practicing going back to that energy when we get afraid is really helpful.
Well, thank you so much. I personally feel inspired and a sense of calmness over me after this discussion. Very reassuring. I hope everyone at home that's watching feels the same. So thank you again for being here with me today, Amy, and thank you to everyone at home that's watching. We will be back tomorrow on Friday, May 15th with the NEDA Connections with Gloria Lucas from Malgona Positivity Pride, and she'll be talking about harm reduction in eating disorders. So thank you, everyone. Take care and have a great rest of your day. Bye.